Everyone wants to open the third eye, chasing colors, lights, and mantras as if a door could be forced open. Yet the real eye isn't on your forehead. It's the quiet awareness beneath every illusion you've mistaken for sight. When fear stops painting what you see, when memory no longer decides what is real, then the invisible begins to reveal itself. What opens is not an eye, it's perception itself. The third eye doesn't open through effort, it unfolds when perception becomes pure. Real vision isn't seeing more, it's seeing without the veil of fear, desire, and memory. In that stillness, awareness stops filtering reality and begins to witness it. Science calls it coherence, mystics call it awakening. When the observer grows silent, the field speaks. And what it reveals isn't new, it has always been there, waiting for you to notice. Long before the term third eye appeared in modern spirituality, ancient cultures were already trying to describe a mysterious kind of vision, one that did not belong to the physical eyes. In Egypt, it was drawn as the Eye of Horus, a symbol of protection and divine awareness, said to see both the world of gods and of men. In India, sages spoke of the Ajna Chakra, the center of inner command, where intuition perceives what intellect cannot. Early Christian mystics referred to the single eye that sees in secret, the eye that, when pure, fills the whole body with light. Each of these images points to the same invisible faculty, consciousness recognizing itself as the seer. The symbol of the eye has survived because it touches something that reason alone cannot explain. A drawn eye on stone or parchment is only a reminder of an inner organ that doesn't exist in flesh, but in awareness. The ancient Egyptians placed it between heaven and earth in their hieroglyphs, suggesting that the third eye is a bridge between the seen and the unseen. In Hindu iconography, the deity Shiva bears it on his forehead, not as decoration, but as the mark of perception that burns illusion. When it opens, it doesn't grant power, it dissolves separation. Yet the modern seeker often mistakes the symbol for the thing itself. They visualize light, chant syllables, or imagine a purple lotus believing that repetition will unlock some hidden gate. But the ancients were never describing a gate. They were describing a moment of recognition, a shift from looking outward to perceiving inwardly. The third eye is not something you open, it's something you remember because it has never been closed. Only attention wandered away from it, distracted by the noise of survival and identity. Science might say the Eye of Horus was a metaphor for the pineal gland, an organ of light-sensitive cells buried deep within the brain. It reacts to cycles of darkness and light, regulating sleep and hormonal balance. But even if it serves as a biological symbol, the essence remains metaphysical. The pineal gland can secrete melatonin, perhaps even trace molecules like DMT, yet no chemical can produce consciousness. The ancient image was never about a gland. It was about the mysterious observer that experiences both matter and meaning. Across cultures, the eye symbol carries a paradox. It represents both seeing and being seen. To the mystic, this is not coincidence. When the third eye opens, it is not you who begin to see more, it is existence that begins to see through you. The eye becomes an aperture through which awareness looks at itself, recognizing that the observer and the observed are made of the same field. That recognition is why so many spiritual traditions place the symbol at the forehead, above dual sight, where the two eyes of polarity converge into one. Myth often hides wisdom in stories. The tale of Odin sacrificing one eye to drink from the well of wisdom, for example, is not about mutilation, but about surrender. One must give up ordinary sight to gain inner sight. Likewise, in Buddhist iconography, the Buddha's serene gaze suggests that true seeing requires stillness. In that calm perception no longer divides the world into categories of good and bad, mine and yours. It begins to perceive the pattern beneath opposites. To understand the third eye is to understand the language of symbols. Every tradition used different imagery, but all pointed toward the same transformation, the moment when perception stops belonging to the ego and starts belonging to consciousness itself. This is why mystics spoke in paradox. The eye through which I see God is the same eye through which God sees me. That single sentence contains the essence of all esoteric teachings. If one were to strip away all myth, what remains is the simple act of awareness noticing awareness. No temple, mantra, or ritual can substitute for that recognition. The symbol exists only to remind you of what was never lost. When you stop searching for the eye as a place and begin to feel it as a state of perception, something subtle shifts. The world does not suddenly glow or change color. Rather, your sense of separation begins to dissolve. In that moment, the symbolic eye fulfills its purpose. It ceases to be an emblem and becomes a mirror. What you see reflected is not an otherworldly light, but the silent witness that has always been behind your seeing. Every myth, every culture, every doctrine was only describing this return, the remembering of the seer behind the sight. That is the true opening of the third eye, not an event, but a homecoming of awareness to itself. The moment consciousness turns inward, perception begins to rewrite its own rules. What we call seeing is not a passive act. It is an interpretation shaped by chemistry, expectation, and history. The science of inner perception begins when we recognize that vision does not occur in the eyes, but in the brain. And even the brain does not see. It decodes patterns of light and translates them into meaning. What happens when that decoding mechanism quiets? When the filters of memory and fear loosen their grip? Something extraordinary emerges. Awareness begins to perceive itself without distortion. Modern neuroscience has long studied the pineal gland, that small crystalline structure nestled between the hemispheres of the brain. Ancient traditions considered it the seat of the soul, the physical counterpart of the third eye. Today we know it regulates melatonin and helps synchronize the body's circadian rhythms. Yet the deeper mystery remains untouched. The pineal gland sits at the geometric center of the brain, surrounded by fluid and darkness, like an antenna hidden in a cave. Some researchers have noted its photoreceptive properties and its ability to transduce electromagnetic information. To the mystic, this aligns with what has always been taught. The pineal is not the source of vision, it is the transmitter. The signal it relays is not light from the outside world, but the subtle frequencies of consciousness itself. When meditation slows the brain's electrical activity from beta to alpha and theta waves, the nervous system begins to resonate differently. In those slower rhythms, the borders of identity soften and perception expands beyond habitual focus. People often describe this as seeing light within, but it is more accurate to say that the mind becomes transparent enough for the energy of awareness to reveal itself. The inner light is not an object, it is a manifestation of coherence, a harmonic state between body, brain, and field. Quantum physics, though cautious about metaphysical claims, provides a language that helps describe this process. In the quantum view, the observer and the observed are inseparable. Measurement itself alters the outcome. If observation shapes reality at the most fundamental level, then consciousness is not a passive bystander. It participates in creation. When we look outward, we collapse possibilities into objects. When we turn inward, we collapse the self into awareness. The opening of the third eye is therefore not mystical fantasy, but a shift in the way information is processed. The observer ceases to be separate from what is observed. Neuroplasticity supports this transformation. Each time we bring attention to subtle inner states, breath, heartbeat, or stillness, neural networks associated with self-referential thought begin to deactivate. The default mode network, the region responsible for constructing our sense of I, temporarily quiets. Studies on experienced meditators show reduced activity in this network during deep states of awareness, accompanied by feelings of unity and clarity. The more often this occurs, the more the brain learns to sustain coherence without losing functionality. The physiology of perception begins to reflect a truth long spoken in esoteric traditions. The mind is not the origin of awareness, it is its instrument. From a practical standpoint, the science of inner perception can be felt, not just understood. When you close your eyes and allow thoughts to settle, notice the space that remains. That spaciousness has no boundary, no center, no form, and yet it is undeniably present. Neuroscience would describe it as a shift in attentional networks. Spirituality calls it consciousness returning to itself. The experience is the same. You sense an inner silence that doesn't depend on sound, a luminosity that doesn't depend on light. The body relaxes, breathing slows, and time loses its linear pull. What you perceive is not an illusion, it is the field of awareness becoming visible to itself. In this intersection between science and spirituality, language begins to fail. The laboratory measures frequencies, hormone levels, neural coherence. The mystic measures stillness, insight, and transformation. Yet both describe the same event from different directions, a synchronization between the observer and the observed. When the internal noise of thought decreases, perception aligns with a broader spectrum of information, one that is subtle, non-local, and deeply intelligent. Inner perception, then, is not about seeing hidden worlds. It is about perceiving this world without distortion. The pineal gland may act as a receiver, but consciousness is the true signal. When we train attention through meditation, breathwork, or contemplation, we refine that receiver, allowing awareness to interpret energy rather than merely form. The result is a kind of intuitive intelligence that transcends reasoning without contradicting it. It doesn't abandon logic, it includes it within a larger understanding. The science of inner perception invites a humbler question than, how do I open my third eye? It asks, how can I become coherent enough for truth to reveal itself? Because clarity does not come from striving, it comes from alignment. In that alignment, the boundaries between science and mysticism blur, and the experiment becomes personal. You are both the observer and the field of observation. The eye you seek to open has never closed, it has only been looking in the wrong direction. Every human being lives behind a subtle film that shapes the world into something personal. This film is woven from memory, fear, desire, and belief, an invisible fabric stretched across awareness that filters reality into stories. We do not see things as they are. We see them as we have been conditioned to expect. The ancient texts spoke of this as Maya, the illusion of separateness, while psychology calls it projection. The third eye remains closed, not because it lacks power, but because perception is constantly busy defending its own narrative. Consider how the mind interprets a simple event. A sound in the dark may be just vibration, yet instantly the brain colors it with meaning, danger, curiosity, annoyance. The senses deliver neutral information, but the mind overlays it with emotion and memory. Over time, these overlays become habitual. We stop perceiving directly and begin perceiving through filters. The world becomes a mirror of our conditioning. In this sense, opening the third eye is less about acquiring vision and more about unlearning distortion. Fear is the first layer of the veil. It narrows awareness, forcing perception into survival mode. When fear dominates, the nervous system locks attention on threats, real or imagined, and the subtle frequencies of intuition cannot be heard. Desire forms the second layer, constantly pulling perception toward what it wants or away from what it resists. Between these two forces, fear and desire, awareness becomes polarized, swinging between avoidance and pursuit. The third layer is memory, every experience stored as a reference point through which the present is compared, labeled, and judged. Together, they create a closed circuit of perception. In that circuit, we believe we are observing the world, yet we are only observing our own mind. The veil is not something external, it is the sum of our inner reactions. When spiritual traditions speak of cleansing perception, they are describing the process of loosening these reflexes. The act of observing thought without engaging it is not passivity, it is the beginning of freedom. The moment awareness sees its own conditioning, the veil begins to thin. Neuroscience offers a parallel explanation. The brain operates through predictive coding. It constantly generates models of the world and compares sensory input against those predictions. What we experience as perception is actually the brain's best guess, refined moment by moment. This mechanism is efficient but also deceptive. The more rigid the model, the less new information enters awareness. In states of meditation, when predictive processes slow down, sensory data becomes raw again. People describe this as vividness, presence, or clarity. It is perception stripped of expectation. When mystics say, you cannot see truth through the mind that fears it, they describe this neurological truth in poetic form. A frightened mind filters data to confirm its fear. A desiring mind filters to preserve hope. Only a still mind perceives accurately. Silence, then, is not an escape from life. It is a recalibration of perception. In silence, the brain's habitual loops find no fuel, and the energy once spent on defense becomes available for awareness. Removing the veil does not mean erasing memory or emotion. It means recognizing them as transient movements within a larger field of consciousness. As awareness expands, experiences are still felt but no longer mistaken for identity. You can sense anger without becoming it, remember pain without reliving it, observe thought without obeying it. This detachment is not coldness, it is lucidity. The third eye begins to open precisely when perception no longer distorts itself through personal bias. There is a moment in every seeker's path when the veil briefly lifts. It may occur during meditation, in the stillness of nature, or in the silence after loss. The world appears the same, yet entirely different, clear, spacious, and intimate. For an instant, everything is seen without commentary. Then the mind rushes back, eager to define what happened. But something has changed. The memory of clarity remains, and with it, a longing to see again. That longing is sacred. It is the call of perception toward its own truth. Science and spirituality converge here. Both acknowledge that perception is limited by its own framework. The scientist tests reality by refining instruments. The mystic does the same by refining consciousness. In both cases, clarity is achieved not by adding complexity, but by removing noise. To open the third eye is to stop interpreting and start witnessing. It is to realize that reality was never hidden, only filtered through the veil of a mind trying to protect itself from the vastness of what is. When that veil thins, the ordinary world reveals its depth. Light feels alive, silence carries texture, and even the smallest gesture becomes luminous. Nothing supernatural occurs, yet everything becomes sacred. The third eye does not grant new sight. It restores the innocence of seeing what has always been here, untouched by fear or desire. There comes a moment in every inner journey when effort becomes an obstacle. The seeker who tries to open the third eye through intensity discovers only exhaustion. Concentration turns into tension, and tension clouds perception. Silence, however, is different. It is not something you create. It is what remains when striving ceases. The paradox is that the most profound awakening occurs not through doing, but through the deep relaxation of being. The third eye opens in silence, not in effort. Silence is not the absence of sound, it is the absence of interference. Imagine a lake at dawn. When the surface is still, it reflects the sky with perfect clarity. When disturbed, it reflects only itself. The mind works in the same way. As long as it ripples with thought, judgment, and analysis, it mirrors its own turbulence. When it becomes still, it reflects reality. Ancient initiates understood this and designed their rituals not as acts of worship, but as methods to generate inner quiet. The temples of Egypt, the caves of India, the monasteries of Tibet, all were acoustic chambers built for one purpose: to amplify silence until the soul could hear its own frequency. Modern neuroscience confirms what those mystics intuited. When the brain transitions into alpha and theta rhythms, the regions responsible for self-reference and narrative processing grow quiet. The result is a state of relaxed alertness, awareness fully awake, but no longer confined to the chatter of the prefrontal cortex. In that space, the nervous system rebalances, cortisol decreases, and the pineal gland becomes more active. It is as if silence itself tunes the instrument of perception. No external sound is needed. The resonance happens within. Many seekers mistake silence for emptiness, fearing it means the absence of meaning. In truth, silence is the womb of meaning. Every word, every insight, every perception arises from it and returns to it. When you sit in genuine quiet, you begin to notice that silence is not passive. It has texture, vibration, presence. It hums with a subtle intelligence. At first, this can feel disorienting, because the ego has spent a lifetime defining itself through noise, opinions, preferences, dialogues, goals. When those voices fall away, who remains? The one who sees without speaking, That is the eye behind the eyes. Silence reveals a different kind of knowing. Intellectual understanding moves in sequences: cause, effect, conclusion. Silent knowing happens all at once. It does not assemble data, it receives wholeness. Artists glimpse it when inspiration strikes. Scientists feel it when a problem resolves suddenly without linear reasoning. In both cases, awareness slips momentarily into silence and emerges with clarity. This is why nearly every tradition describes the awakened state as a kind of still light, motionless yet creative, silent yet overflowing with understanding. The path to that silence is paradoxically simple. Stop resisting what is. The mind's habit of labeling experience as good or bad is what keeps the noise alive. When you allow each sensation, thought, or emotion to arise without preference, the mind begins to exhaust its own momentum. Eventually it grows quiet, not because you forced it to, but because it has nothing left to fight. In that surrender, something vast and benevolent is revealed, a still awareness that was always present, patiently waiting beneath the surface of thought. Silence is not an escape from life, it is an encounter with it at a deeper frequency. The silence of meditation, of solitude, or of nature is the same field that hums beneath every sound. You do not need to retreat to find it. You only need to listen more fully. The more attuned you become, the more silence expands even within motion, conversation, or conflict. It ceases to be a moment of pause and becomes a permanent undercurrent, awareness that perceives without interference. The real initiation begins when silence no longer feels like a practice, but a presence. It teaches without words, reveals without effort, heals without agenda. In its company, perception reorganizes itself. Light appears softer yet more vivid. Thoughts arise with more coherence. Emotions flow without residue. Silence purifies perception by restoring it to neutrality. The eye that opens in silence sees the world not as an object, but as a living field of vibration. In this initiation, there are no mantras to repeat, no steps to complete. The only requirement is sincerity, the willingness to stop chasing experience and simply be. For a moment, close your eyes and listen, not to external sounds, but to the still hum beneath them. Notice how silence isn't separate from you, it is you before identity formed. Stay with that recognition. That still awareness is the true opening, the unspoken initiation that every mystic sought. When the mind becomes utterly quiet, perception shifts from personal to universal. You are no longer a witness observing silence, you are the silence observing itself. And in that realization, the third eye opens effortlessly, not as a light in the forehead, but as the dawn within consciousness. What follows is not enlightenment as fantasy, but a lucid simplicity where being and seeing are one. When the mind grows still, perception begins to translate energy in its pure form. Many describe this as seeing light during meditation, a radiance that flickers behind closed eyes, sometimes colorless, sometimes vibrant. Yet what appears is not a fantasy or hallucination. It is the nervous system decoding subtle frequencies that usually remain invisible. The third eye is not an organ of light, but a lens that perceives the relationship between consciousness and vibration. When the lens clears, awareness begins to notice that light is not something entering you. It is something emerging from you. Physics reminds us that visible light occupies only a narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum. Beyond it, stretch frequencies our eyes cannot detect, but our bodies can sense. Infrared warmth, ultraviolet resonance, even the faint electromagnetic hum of thought itself. Every cell, every atom, vibrates within this unseen orchestra. The pineal gland, rich with microcrystals of calcite, has been shown to exhibit piezoelectric properties. It can convert mechanical vibration into electrical potential. Ancient mystics may have intuited this. Their practices of breath retention, rhythmic chanting, and gaze fixation were not arbitrary rituals. They were ways of tuning the body's inner circuitry to a higher coherence. When consciousness aligns with that coherence, perception shifts. The inner light is not produced by neurons firing, but by awareness resonating with the unified field that sustains all phenomena. You could say that the body becomes a prism, Consciousness enters as pure frequency, and the mind disperses it into colors of experience, emotion, thought, sensation. When meditation deepens, the prism clears, and the full spectrum returns to transparency. The mystic sees not light as an object, but light as being. Every spiritual tradition contains metaphors of illumination. In the Gospel of Matthew, the body is said to be full of light when the eye is single. The Upanishads describe the Atman as the light behind all lights. Even quantum science speaks of photons as dual entities, waves and particles, responding to observation. These parallels are not poetic coincidences, they are reflections of a single truth expressed through different vocabularies. Light in both physics and mysticism behaves as consciousness behaves, aware of itself when observed, invisible when ignored. To perceive the hidden spectrum, one must learn to feel frequency rather than chase vision. Start by noticing how certain environments change your state, not just emotionally but physically. A forest hums at a different vibration than a city street. A sincere conversation radiates differently from a room filled with pretense. These variations are frequencies in the field, and your body is constantly translating them. When your awareness becomes refined enough, perception expands from the gross to the subtle. You begin to see without eyes, to sense without effort. Light at its core is intelligence in motion. The photons that illuminate a room are the same particles that, in the early universe, carried the blueprint of galaxies. On a human scale, this same intelligence appears as intuition, inspiration, synchronicity. When the third eye awakens, the boundary between inner and outer light dissolves. The energy that shapes stars and the energy that shapes thought are revealed as one continuum. This is why those who experience deep meditative illumination often describe a sense of unity rather than spectacle. The vision is not external. It is the self realizing its continuity with the cosmos. The hidden spectrum also explains why true illumination is humbling. When the field begins to reveal itself, the ego's desire to control it dissolves. Light cannot be possessed. It can only be participated in. Trying to capture it with words or images feels like trapping wind in a jar. The more one surrenders, the more coherent the field becomes. Silence and stillness are not prerequisites for this experience. They are its natural language. In daily life, the way to remain attuned to that spectrum is through coherence. Every moment of honesty, compassion, or gratitude increases vibrational alignment. The light within is not mystical. It is coherence expressed through emotion and attention. When perception vibrates at that frequency, the world itself begins to respond. Encounters flow more smoothly, intuition sharpens, and even coincidences seem orchestrated by an unseen intelligence. This realization invites a simple but profound reflection. If light is the language of consciousness, then every thought and action either distorts or harmonizes it. You are constantly shaping the frequency you live in. The third eye's true function is not to witness supernatural visions, but to restore harmony between what you emit and what you perceive. The clearer your inner light, the more transparent reality becomes. If these words stirred something luminous within you, perhaps a quiet recognition, a subtle warmth, or a spark of curiosity, let that light speak. Take a breath, feel the radiance behind your eyes, and share in the comments one word that describes the color or sensation of the light you sense right now. Then, if the message resonated, touch the heart icon as a simple gesture of coherence. Let that action be your way of sending a pulse of light back into the field. There is a moment, subtle yet irreversible, when perception begins to realize that it is not an act performed by a person. It is an event occurring within the field of consciousness itself. What we call the observer is not a fixed identity standing apart from reality, but a dynamic point where reality becomes aware of itself. This understanding, though poetic, also finds echoes in modern physics. In the quantum world, the act of observation affects the state of what is being observed. Particles behave as waves of probability until measured. Only then do they appear as defined entities. Observation does not merely record reality, it participates in its creation. To open the third eye is to see that this principle operates not just in laboratories, but in the fabric of everyday experience. Every perception collapses infinite potential into a single version of reality. When you look at a tree, a city, or another person, what you perceive is filtered through expectation and attention. The moment you shift your awareness, the meaning of what you see transforms. Consciousness, like a vast field, reorganizes itself according to the observer's frequency. The outer world is a projection of inner coherence or confusion. In this sense, the field is not external. It is the mirror of your own vibrational state. When the third eye begins to awaken, this interplay between observer and field becomes experiential rather than theoretical. You start to feel that reality responds to your state of consciousness as naturally as water shapes itself around a stone. In moments of clarity, the world seems to align effortlessly. Synchronicities unfold, conversations flow, and even random events carry symbolic resonance. When awareness contracts into fear or agitation, the field mirrors that contraction through resistance and distortion. It is not that the universe punishes or rewards, it simply reflects coherence or noise. Neuroscience offers a language for this feedback loop. The brain is a predictive organ, constantly generating internal models of the world and updating them through sensory feedback. When these models align with reality, perception feels fluid and accurate. When misaligned, confusion and suffering arise. Meditation, introspection, and other forms of self-observation refine these internal models by reducing cognitive noise. As the brain's networks synchronize, perception becomes less about control and more about attunement. What mystics call the field can be understood scientifically as the emergent intelligence of a coherent system. Imagine consciousness as an ocean and the observer as a single wave. The wave appears distinct, yet its substance is identical to the sea. When the wave forgets its origin, it feels isolated and fragile. When it remembers, individuality remains, but separation dissolves. The same principle governs perception. The third eye does not erase individuality. It reveals that individuality is a temporary expression of something boundless. Seeing through the field means recognizing that awareness is shared, that every thought and emotion ripple outward, affecting the collective vibration. This recognition carries both humility and power. The humility comes from realizing that you are not the source of perception but its instrument. The power comes from understanding that alignment with the field changes everything you experience. Thoughts that emerge from fear create interference. Thoughts that arise from coherence generate harmony. The field amplifies both without judgment. The third eye perceives not objects, but relationships, patterns of energy interweaving through apparent form. To live from this awareness is to stop reacting and start resonating. Some people experience this shift as a moment of disorientation. The boundaries between self and world blur. Sensations, sounds, and even emotions seem to belong to a larger intelligence that breathes through all things. It can feel as though the universe is looking back through your own eyes. This is not imagination, but a reorganization of perception. Awareness ceases to identify with the wave and begins to sense the ocean moving within it. Quantum theory hints that the universe is participatory, that consciousness and matter are entwined in a dance of mutual creation. Spirituality calls the same truth by another name, unity. Both point to a single realization. The observer and the field are one continuum of perception, oscillating between form and formlessness. The third eye is simply the faculty that perceives this continuum directly. When this awareness stabilizes, life changes in subtle but profound ways. The need to control outcomes diminishes, replaced by an intuitive trust in the intelligence of the field. Decisions arise naturally, aligned with circumstances rather than imposed upon them. Encounters with others become exchanges of frequency instead of conflicts of will. Even silence feels communicative, as though the air itself carries awareness. The awakening of the third eye, then, is not an expansion outward, but a dissolution inward, the end of the illusion that you were ever outside of what you perceive. What looks through your eyes is the same presence that forms the world around you. The observer and the field have never been separate. They are two expressions of the same consciousness, eternally watching itself through the infinite mirror of existence. To open the third eye is to invite a quiet revolution within. What dissolves is not the body, but the identity that believed it was separate from everything else. It is often described as death because it feels like one, the death of the image you have spent a lifetime constructing. Every role, story, and memory that once defined you begins to loosen its hold, and in that release, something vast starts to breathe through you. Awareness no longer clings to being a name or a history. It becomes an open sky where thoughts pass like weather. This dying is not tragic. It is liberation disguised as loss. When perception begins to awaken beyond the veil of the personal self, the mind initially resists. It has been conditioned to maintain continuity, to protect the familiar even if it causes suffering. The ego's function is survival, not truth. And so, when the third eye opens and exposes the fragility of the story it tells, the mind interprets it as danger. Fear arises, confusion follows, and life can momentarily lose its coordinates. Many seekers stop here, mistaking disorientation for failure, when in fact it is a sign that the structures of illusion are breaking apart. In this stage, perception becomes unanchored. The old self dissolves faster than the new sense of being can stabilize. The inner narrative quiets, but the silence feels strange, too wide, too empty. You may find yourself weeping without knowing why, laughing at the absurdity of things once taken seriously, or feeling as though you are watching someone else live your life. This is the crossing between identities, the space between who you were and what you are becoming. Mystics have called it the dark night of the soul, not because it is evil, but because vision is adjusting to a different kind of light. Biologically, such transformation has its counterpart in the nervous system. When the habitual circuits of self-reference weaken, the brain begins to rewire. Studies on long-term meditators reveal decreased activity in regions associated with egoic processing and increased coherence between hemispheres. The shift feels emotional because it is physical. The body itself must recalibrate to sustain higher awareness. Old patterns of tension, repression, or emotional avoidance surface to be released. The energy once used to defend identity becomes available for perception. It is not destruction, it is reorganization. The death of the old self does not erase personality, it refines it. The ego, once a tyrant, becomes an instrument. It no longer dictates reality, but helps translate the ineffable into action. You still laugh, work, love, and grieve, but the sense of ownership changes. Experiences occur, yet there is no compulsion to label them as mine. A new intelligence begins to move through you, spontaneous, intuitive, and compassionate. The third eye, in its true function, is not a supernatural sensor, but the awareness that perceives all experience without identification. There is humility in this awakening. The grandeur often associated with enlightenment fades into something quieter, almost ordinary. The extraordinary dissolves into the simplicity of being. The real transformation is not in acquiring vision, but in losing pretense. When the old self dies, what remains is not emptiness but spaciousness. It is as if the universe exhales through you and you realize you were never apart from its breath. Every sound, every gesture, every heartbeat becomes an extension of a single presence moving through countless forms. Still, this rebirth can be tender. The ego, though diminished, continues to echo like an afterimage. Sometimes it resurfaces, insisting on its importance. The task is not to fight it, but to see it clearly. Illusion loses power when observed without judgment. Awareness burns it away like sunlight dissolving mist. Over time, identity becomes translucent, allowing consciousness to shine through without obstruction. You begin to live as transparency itself, nothing to defend, nothing to prove. The paradox of this death is that it reveals immortality. When the false self collapses, what remains cannot die because it was never born. It existed before thought named it, and will remain after thought dissolves. This realization brings peace beyond belief, for it ends the fundamental fear that drives human behavior, the fear of disappearance. You understand that only forms vanish, not the field that animates them. The seer and the seen are made of the same substance, endlessly transforming yet never separate. Those who pass through this inner death rarely speak of power or achievement. They speak of gentleness. Their lives unfold with a quiet precision, guided not by will, but by attunement. Compassion arises effortlessly because the boundary between self and other has dissolved. To harm another would be to wound oneself. To forgive becomes natural, not as a virtue, but as recognition. Life continues, but with a different center of gravity. The identity that once fought for survival now serves the flow of consciousness, expressing itself through form. In the end, the death of the old self is not an ending but a return to the awareness that was always present before names, stories, and desires began. The third eye opens fully when you no longer ask to see, for the one who was asking has vanished. What remains is vision without a viewer, life witnessing itself through the quiet transparency of your being. When the third eye begins to awaken, perception slips free from the grid of linear time. Past and future, once felt as separate corridors, start to fold into a single living continuum. It does not mean that clocks stop or that ordinary life dissolves, but rather that awareness ceases to depend on sequence to understand reality. What we call time is a rhythm through which consciousness organizes experience. When the organizing mind grows silent, that rhythm expands into a vast simultaneity, everything happening at once, like notes of a single chord. The third eye perceives this chord not as memory or prediction, but as pattern. In ordinary perception, the mind divides experience into before and after, cause and effect. It arranges events like beads on a string, building the illusion of continuity. Yet even modern physics suggests that this flow is relative. Einstein described time as a dimension woven with space into a single fabric. At the quantum scale, particles appear to exist in multiple states at once, their history and future intertwined. If the act of observation determines their state, then awareness is already participating across timelines. What we perceive as temporal movement may simply be consciousness scanning different slices of a multidimensional field. When awareness enters deeper meditative states, this multidimensionality becomes perceptible. Images, intuitions, and sensations arise without origin, as though drawn from a field beyond chronology. You might sense the echo of an event before it unfolds, or recognize a stranger with inexplicable familiarity. These are not miracles. They are glimpses of the timeless structure that underlies experience. The third eye sees the architecture of reality not as a line, but as a web, where every point connects to every other through resonance. This expanded vision dissolves the anxiety of anticipation. The future ceases to be a distant threat or promise. It becomes a possibility already alive in the present. The mystics who spoke of prophecy were not predicting fixed outcomes. They were perceiving tendencies within the field, just as a musician senses where a melody wants to resolve. Premonition, intuition, and synchronicity all arise from this ability to sense vibrational momentum before it manifests. To live with the third eye open is to recognize that the future is not waiting ahead. It is forming now, in the subtle alignment between awareness and intention. In this state, memory transforms as well. The past is no longer a fixed archive, but a living dimension that can be revisited and rewritten through perception. Neuroscience supports this idea. Each time we recall an event, the brain reconstructs it anew, updating details based on current emotion and belief. The act of remembering is also an act of creation. When consciousness becomes aware of this, healing old wounds becomes possible not through denial, but through reinterpretation. The energy once frozen in memory begins to move again, freeing the present from repetition. Vision beyond time also changes the meaning of destiny. The linear mind imagines destiny as a predetermined path laid out by some external force. The awakened perception sees destiny as coherence, the natural trajectory of a vibration seeking harmony. Every choice sends a frequency into the field. Every emotion tunes the instrument of experience. The path that unfolds is not imposed, but resonant. When awareness aligns with its highest frequency, clarity, compassion, authenticity, life organizes itself around that tone. What appears as luck or divine orchestration is simply resonance made visible. Living in this expanded perception requires subtle balance. The ego longs to use timeless awareness to control outcomes, to bend the field toward its desires. But the more it grasps, the more distortion appears. True vision operates through surrender, not command. When you stop insisting on how reality should unfold, you begin to perceive the intricate intelligence already shaping it. The third eye reveals that existence is self-organizing, guided by a rhythm too vast to comprehend. To trust that rhythm is the highest form of seeing. This state does not detach you from practical life, it deepens it. The person who perceives beyond time moves through ordinary moments with extraordinary presence. Conversations feel slower, richer, infused with subtle meaning. Coincidences become guidance rather than accident. Even challenges appear as necessary calibrations within a larger pattern. The pace of life continues, but your relationship to it changes. You are no longer racing through time. You are standing within it, watching the current flow around you while remaining unmoved at the center. Ultimately, vision beyond time is not about predicting or escaping the temporal world. It is about perceiving eternity within it. Every instant contains the whole of existence folded within its fabric. The third eye perceives this wholeness directly, recognizing that each moment is the universe meeting itself in form. The past is memory vibrating now, the future is potential vibrating now, and the present is awareness unbound by either. When that realization stabilizes, the anxiety of mortality fades. What you are has never been a creature moving through time. It is time itself, dreaming of being a person for a while. When the third eye truly opens, it does not transport you to another realm. It brings you fully into this one. The awakened vision is not about escaping the world, but perceiving it without distortion. Life remains ordinary. You wake, breathe, work, speak, love. Yet beneath every movement flows a quiet intelligence that was invisible before. The air feels alive, conversations feel orchestrated, and even silence seems to hum with meaning. This is not magic or hallucination, it is coherence between inner and outer reality. To live with an open eye is to exist in direct relationship with truth. The person who sees through the awakened eye stops dividing experience into sacred and mundane. Washing dishes becomes as profound as meditation because both are expressions of the same field. Awareness no longer prioritizes one moment over another. It perceives continuity everywhere. This unbroken attention is the essence of presence. When the mind stops fragmenting time into before and after, every act becomes complete in itself. You begin to sense that existence is a single movement, not a sequence of separate events. The open eye sees this unity as vividly as the physical eyes see light. The transformation is subtle but radical. Instead of reacting to circumstances, you begin to respond from alignment. Emotions still arise, anger, joy, sorrow, but they move through you like wind through leaves. They no longer define you. The self that once clung to control becomes transparent, and what remains is awareness acting without resistance. Decisions arise not from analysis, but from attunement. You feel what action is coherent, rather than calculating what is advantageous. It is a form of intelligence that transcends reasoning without contradicting it. The open eye does not suppress the mind, it liberates it from distortion. In this state, relationships also transform. When perception no longer filters through fear or desire, you stop meeting people as characters in your personal story. You begin to see them as mirrors of the same awareness, looking back at itself. Compassion becomes natural, not moral. You recognize that everyone is moving through the same field, shaped by the same invisible laws. To hurt another is to distort your own reflection. To forgive another is to restore clarity to the shared mirror. This is why those who live with open perception often radiate calm. They are no longer at war with what they see. Science provides its own mirror to this truth. Studies on coherent heart and brain rhythms show that states of compassion, gratitude, or calm produce measurable electromagnetic harmony in the body. This coherence subtly influences the environment, synchronizing nearby systems, human and otherwise. What the mystic perceives as energetic alignment, the scientist measures as resonance. The awakened eye perceives this not as theory, but as lived reality. When you think, feel, and act from coherence, the field around you organizes itself into harmony. Circumstances that once seemed random begin to reflect intention with uncanny precision. Living with an open eye also means seeing through symbols. The universe communicates in patterns, numbers repeating, phrases echoing, encounters aligning with inner questions. These are not coincidences to be worshipped or feared. They are reflections of vibrational feedback. Awareness projects frequency, and reality answers in kind. The open eye reads this language effortlessly. A delay, a silence, or an unexpected turn all become messages in the dialogue between consciousness and creation. Life ceases to be a puzzle to solve and becomes a poem unfolding. Yet this clarity does not isolate you from the world. It deepens your participation. You engage in work, creativity, and relationship with greater precision and gentleness. Productivity loses its frantic edge because you act from flow rather than urgency. You no longer chase meaning, you embody it. The open eye recognizes that purpose is not found in grand achievements, but in the integrity of each gesture. Even the smallest act performed with awareness carries universal significance. To live with the third eye open is to move through existence as transparency. The distinction between observer and observed softens until perception itself becomes love, an unconditional recognition of the same essence everywhere. This love is not sentimental, it is structural. It holds galaxies together and breathes through the space between your thoughts. When you feel it, you realize that alignment, not effort, sustains creation. Still, such vision requires humility. Awareness must continually renew its clarity, for the noise of the world can easily cloud perception. The discipline of the awakened life is not control but remembrance, remembering that silence is always available beneath noise, that truth is always present beneath perception, that the field never stops reflecting your frequency. Every day becomes a quiet practice of coherence, walking, speaking, resting in awareness as naturally as breathing. Ultimately, living with an open eye is not an achievement, but a surrender. You stop trying to see and allow seeing to happen through you. You become the meeting point between the infinite and the immediate, between the unseen and the tangible. In that meeting, life is revealed as sacred, not because it changes, but because you finally perceive it as it is, whole, intelligent, and luminous from within. At the end of every authentic search, the seeker discovers something paradoxical. The guide they longed for was never outside. The voices of masters, scriptures, and philosophies were only echoes leading back to a source that had always been within. When the third eye opens completely, the hunger for external validation dissolves. What replaces it is not arrogance, but quiet certainty. The inner teacher, the intelligence that observes, corrects, and illuminates from the depths of silence, returns to its rightful place. It does not instruct through words, but through resonance. It does not demand belief. It reveals truth through direct perception. The early stages of spiritual pursuit often rely on borrowed light. We read, listen, imitate, and compare, gathering fragments of understanding like travelers collecting maps. But every map is limited by the terrain it was drawn from. The more one depends on outer instruction, the more distant the living source appears. The true initiation begins when the maps are set aside and attention turns inward, toward the faculty of awareness itself. In that inward gaze, the teacher awakens as presence, an intelligence that does not argue or persuade, but simply knows. This knowing is not the product of accumulation. It arises from coherence between consciousness and its field. When thought becomes silent enough, awareness begins to recognize patterns without analysis. You might sense when a decision aligns with truth before evidence appears, or feel the subtle dissonance that warns of illusion. The inner teacher communicates through vibration, not reasoning. Its voice has no language, yet it speaks with unmistakable clarity. Many traditions describe it as intuition, conscience, or the higher self. But these are only facets of one phenomenon: consciousness remembering its own intelligence. In scientific terms, one could call this process self-regulation. The brain and heart form a feedback system that constantly measures internal harmony. When the system is coherent, physiological signals synchronize and intuition sharpens. What mystics perceive as divine guidance may be the nervous system operating at its highest efficiency, an embodied form of wisdom, yet reducing it to biology misses the essence. The mechanism is physical, but the awareness guiding it transcends structure. The inner teacher operates at the intersection of matter and consciousness, translating energy into insight. The return of this teacher transforms one's relationship with knowledge. Study and practice no longer serve to accumulate authority. They become tools for refinement. Each experience, joyful or painful, is recognized as instruction. The world itself becomes a classroom, and every encounter a lesson in coherence. Failure is not punishment, but feedback from the field. Success is not reward, but confirmation of alignment. When awareness matures in this way, learning becomes continuous, yet effortless. The line between meditation and life disappears. Paradoxically, the more one trusts this inner intelligence, the more humility deepens. For the teacher within has no face, no personality to defend. It belongs to a dimension of consciousness that includes all beings. When you listen deeply, you begin to sense that the same intelligence guiding your decisions moves the wind through the trees and the tides across the ocean. It is not your intuition. It is the universe thinking through you. The third eye perceives this continuity, revealing that guidance is never personal, but participatory. Throughout history, mystics who reached this understanding often withdrew from the language of authority. They spoke less about doctrines and more about direct experience. "The kingdom of heaven is within you," said one teacher. "The self is the light of all lights," said another. These were not metaphors, they were testimonies from those who had witnessed the return of the inner teacher. Their purpose was not to establish belief systems, but to awaken in others the confidence to look inward. The real lineage of wisdom is not genetic or institutional, it is vibrational, passed through presence. When the third eye is fully open, the distinction between teacher and student dissolves altogether. Awareness realizes it has been playing both roles, the one asking and the one answering. The dialogue of seeking ends, replaced by a still communion with the source. Life continues, but guidance now arises from within every moment. The right book, person, or situation appears precisely when needed, as if orchestrated by an unseen intelligence. But the awakened one knows that the orchestrator is the same awareness perceiving it. To live under the guidance of the inner teacher is to move with quiet precision. Words lose their urgency, decisions become simple, and gratitude flows naturally. There is no need to convince or convert, only to embody coherence. The field responds to clarity like sound responds to resonance. You become both the question and its resolution, the student and the master, the voice and the silence between words. In the end, the return of the inner teacher is not an event, it is a homecoming. The seeker stops searching because the path has folded back into its origin. The eye that once looked outward turns inward and recognizes the gaze that has been guiding it all along. What remains is awareness resting in awareness, the simplest and most profound instruction of all. You were never without guidance, only without quiet enough to hear it. You were never blind, only distracted by the noise of your own mind. The third eye doesn't open through effort, but through remembrance. When silence meets awareness, vision becomes whole. You realize the seer and the seen were never apart. The journey ends where it began, in the still space behind the eyes, where light is born from consciousness itself, and perception finally becomes love seeing through you. Close your eyes for a moment and feel the quiet space behind your forehead, the vastness that watches without thought. That is the doorway you've been seeking. If this journey resonated with you, write the word "awakened" in the comments so I know you reached the end. And if you want more explorations like this, subscribe, so the next time awareness calls, you'll already be listening.